Good evening and welcome to Tartan Touchdown, Scotland's conversation with the world of American football. I'm Gavin Strathern and tonight I'm joined by my co-host Dan Connor. Dan, how are you?
Yeah, excellent, Gav. Looking forward to another great episode of In Conversation with tonight with a very special guest.
Excellent, thanks very much, Dan. And absolutely right, it is a very special guest and really drawing on that international flavour this evening. The World Games are just days away and we're joined from Massachusetts this evening by Jack Reed. Thanks for joining us. And of course, Jack, the head coach of the GB women's flag football team, heading into both the World Games and the Euro Flag Championship in Paris coming up in September. Jack, as we always like to do with our guests, we'd like to, take a bit of time to talk about your journey in football.
Yeah, my uncles, cousins, father, everybody played football. So, as a kid growing up in Leominster, Massachusetts, football has always been a really big part of my life and, other sports as well, but football was always my main sport. So, yeah, I grew up with football as a really important part of my life. So when I first started playing, they tried to put me on offensive line, but my first scrimmage, there was a passing play and like the goal line situation. I ran out and I caught a touchdown pass as a right guard. So they moved me to tight end after that. And so in youth football, I was a tight end, played some fullback, linebacker, and then in high school and college, my dreams of being a skill position player were over. And I got moved to center and nose guard. So yeah, that was my primary position in high school and college.
Yeah, good mixture of experience, very much across the offense in particular. I guess obviously you mentioned you're playing contact throughout your high school and your college career.
My introduction to flag was really as an administrator. I managed the first U.S. national teams in 2008 that went to the World Championship in Montreal. And then later I started a youth flag football league in Leominster, Massachusetts, and started coaching from there. So my playing experience, I didn't have a whole lot of playing experience with flag football.
Yeah, Jack, so you mentioned that your first kind of introduction with flag football was an administrative role with USA Football. How did that come about? Obviously, you mentioned to us off air that straight out of college, that's what you went into. So how did that all come about?
Yeah, so I was studying sports business at New York University in Manhattan and was just really passionate about international football and wanting to get involved with international football. So when I graduated, I took like a 5-week trip, went to Europe for about 3 weeks, went to Japan for 2 weeks around the 2007 IFAF World Championship in Kawasaki. And out there, I met the CEO of USA Football, kind of shared my story, what I was looking to do to get involved with international football. And it was kind of right place, right time. They had just opened up a position for an international program manager. So I was hired for that position. And, for the next 6 years, kind of worked with USA Football and IFAF.
So what was involved in that role with USA Football then? What did it involve?
Well, the first task was to get funding from the NFL Youth Football Fund. So at that point, IFAF had never really received funding. We put together a proposal for about $2.5 million, which got funded, and that essentially funded, a lot of youth development programs around the world. I think at that time, where international football was, there wasn't really a focus on youth and youth development. And so, that's what that funding was for. And so I was responsible for lots of different funding programs, whether it was coaching clinics or, different development programs. We had the IFAF World Team program. We had equipment programs. Yeah. So that's sort of how I got involved with international football.
Excellent.
Yes, at that time, thinking from certainly the NFL's perspective, that was the time where there was a real pivot internationally, moving from they had the NFL Europe League that they essentially ditched and then moved into the international series. But I guess from that IFAF perspective, can you tell us about the transformation that you saw in the international game over your time there?
Um, I would say that period was really a period of growth. IFAF went from 29 member countries to over 70 member countries in like a 5-year span. The focus was on youth development at the time, but the focus was also to check all the boxes that needed to be checked to receive IOC recognition, which was the first step in, the Olympic process, receiving IOC recognition. So a lot of things that we did, hosting the first ever IFAF Women's World Championship. That was a key thing for IOC recognition. So I would say over that period of time, the transition really went from being, an international federation that wasn't really well positioned in the international sports landscape to being one that met the criteria for International Olympic Committee recognition.
That's fascinating. And I guess it really is amazing to hear that, because we now look at those steps and putting the governance in place and the structures, and now we're starting to see world games, world championships that are well attended, and of course the big one, the Olympics, is now just a matter of years away. But it's putting all these building blocks in place, laying the foundations to get us to where we are now.
Yeah, it was a long process. I think a lot of people, think that the Olympics just kind of happened, but there was, there's a long process involved with that. A lot of different people, a lot of different groups, that contributed to that. So yeah.
As someone who kind of obviously worked in that behind the scenes, like you said, everybody else thinks that the Olympics just appeared one day and decided we're going to have flag football. That was all that happened. But for someone who was involved in kind of the building blocks and how that all came about, can you give us a kind of wee bit of background into how it all started and how it started becoming a serious conversation?
Is the question how flag started becoming a serious conversation?
In terms of IOC in the Olympics.
Yeah, so I think that, what I just described in sort of that history from, 2007 to 2013, flag wasn't even really part of the conversation. Flag really became part of the conversation in 2018 in Panama at the World Championship, and that was really where the leadership of IFAF and all the countries around the world decided that flag was going to be the game that would be pushed for Olympic inclusion. Up until that point, all the things that I described earlier about, becoming recognized by the IOC, during that time, tackle was always the goal, to get tackle football into the Olympics, which I mentioned like an emphasis on the Women's World Championship. Tackle wasn't going to get into the Olympics unless there was a women's competition. And so that was really important. There were certain thresholds on, number of countries participating too. But I would say that, around 2018 is really when the shift went away from tackle and the focus came on flag football.
Yeah. Can you think of any, was there any kind of reasons why? Did you ever find out why that shift happened? Did you just think it was more realistic, or is there any kind of background you can give us into that?
Yeah, I think that there were a few different factors. One was, that was a period of time for IFAF where they had just sort of come out of a tumultuous period, with the whole split in IFAF between 2015 and 2017. So I think that's where they really, IFAF was getting its footing underneath them, new leadership, within IFAF. And then I think just the reality of the situation, the reality of what it takes to get a sport into the Olympics, the limits on athletes, the requirements for the best players to play, was always going to be hard to get the best tackle football players in the world to play for their national teams. The tackle national team numbers are really big, 40 to 45 players. So I think it was a lot of that just coming together. And then honestly, just a recognition of the sport of flag football, and that flag football is exciting. It's competitive. It's a product that, IFAF and the member countries can sell. It really felt like, I remember being in Panama in 2018 and being with the president of IFAF at the time and other members of like the executive committee. and just kind of looking around at like the level of play on the field, and then also like the fan support, in Panama. And I remember the president of IFAF at the time saying, like, now this is something that we can sell to the world. And so, I think there were a lot of different factors for that transition, but more just like the reality that for a lot of reasons, flag would have a better chance of getting accepted into the Olympics.
That's a fascinating insight. Thanks.
Absolutely. I think Panama is certainly a country that we'll be coming back to over the course of the conversation. I guess we've talked so far about your time, playing the sport and then becoming an administrator, but not really making that bridge into coaching yet, Jack. So how did that first come about for you?
Yeah, so I started coaching tackle before I coached flag, and I realized that I had a passion for coaching, for working with kids, and I'd coached tackle for about 4 years, and then our league, I mentioned I started the Leominster Flag Football League in 2014. Our league had grown. The first year we had 225 kids. By year 3, we had over 400. And we were in a situation where we kind of needed a coach in each age category. So we did it by grade. So there was like a kindergarten. So I had kids in all those grades, and they needed a coach. So I ended up coaching their teams. But that's really where I started coaching flag, was in the Leominster Flag Football League.
It's really a program that's gone from strength to strength. I mean, I could list accolades over the past several years, but just this year alone, both the under 14 boys and the high school girls teams from Leominster both went to the NFL Flag Championship. So it's really a program that's going strong at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, we're honestly a really unique program. I think, like, we're a small town in Massachusetts. We're a sports town, where we have a long history of football, baseball. A lot of successful people have come out of Leominster. I actually just recently, was telling the GB women about all the pro athletes that we have. So there's Noah Gray, who's a backup tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. He played in our program. He's from Leominster, Massachusetts. There's a player named Pat Gallagher, who was drafted by the Toronto Blue Jays. He played in our program. We have Diego Fagundes, who plays for, I think, LA Galaxy now, but was on New England Revolution. And then Mark Daignault just won the NBA championship as the head coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder. He was a high school classmate of mine. He was 2 years behind me in high school. So we, have sent a lot of people to, the NFL, Major League Baseball, the professional sports in the U.S. But Leominster is really, a small town that has become a flag football town in the last 12 years. So we travel around the country, we play, but a lot of the programs that we play are, they're either metropolitan areas, where they have hundreds of thousands or millions of people living in them, or they're club-based programs that pull from people outside of just one town. So yeah, I mean, you mentioned the NFL Flag Championships. Like one statistic that we're really proud of is there is only 2 programs in the country that qualified teams in both the 14U boys and high school girls. It was us, and then the Jags Elite program, which is sponsored by the Jacksonville Jaguars. So we were the only 2 programs to qualify teams in both those age categories. So yeah, it's a really unique program. We represent a town, but we're pretty competitive on a national stage.
Obviously, Jack, just generally flag football the last few years has exploded across the world. It's a massive sport now, but in a small kind of town like yourself, what would you put down the growth? What you see, you've not got a massive catchment area of players. Like, how do you attract them to play flag football rather than going to play in other sports?
Well, I think that the way that it started was to position flag football as a secondary sport. It was something that kids could play, in the springtime. A lot of kids play baseball or lacrosse. We were 1 day a week, so kids our spring league is played on Sundays, so kids could play their baseball season and then come to us one day a week. And that's really how it started. And then what we found is there were a lot of kids that were finding their sport with flag football and really, enjoying it and wanting more. And I think ultimately, we've worked really hard, to recruit kids and to eliminate barriers for kids to play, like financial reasons. But at the end of the day, the sport is fun, and kids want to do what they enjoy doing. And so, in our town, a lot of people enjoy playing flag football.
What I love about flag football, especially, is that it's accessible for everyone, especially kids. It's accessible to everybody. Anybody can rock up and play flag football. Obviously, need to learn the fundamentals, but there's no barriers to kids playing flag football. You can learn the sport. Obviously, there's going to be certain kids that have got that level of talent, that level of athleticism, but it's a sport that any kid can walk in, learn the fundamentals of and play, and that must be crucial for you to get players as well.
Yeah, I think not just play, but find success in the sport too. Whether it's and success is defined differently for everybody. But if kids are put in the right position, not only can they play, but they can contribute to the team and have success. And that's ultimately what kids want, I think.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jack. And I guess one thing that'd be really interesting to learn about from your perspective is, of course, you've talked about setting up programs in Leominster, but also seeing how programs develop across the world. What do you think that we can still learn in the UK in terms of how to develop our flag infrastructure?
Yeah, I think that there's two major differences between what's happening right now in the United States, for example, and what's happening in England. The first is the age of kids. We have kids that are 6 years old traveling around the country every weekend playing in tournaments and championships. And, I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, but we start at a younger age, so it's whether it's, the 6-year-olds or, even the 8, 9, 10-year-olds, we by the time our kids get to, the U15 or U17 level, they've played flag football for a long time, in some cases. And then I would say the second thing is just the frequency of competitions and the accessibility of it. There's a tournament, multiple tournaments every single weekend here in the United States. I know some coaches, some teams that have literally traveled for the last 8 or 9 weeks, and every single weekend is a different state, different tournament, different opportunity. So, as a coach, I feel like, in 1 year coaching, let's say the youth in the United States, I might coach, I'm trying to think of like just this year alone, I've coached over 50 games, and in a full year, there's some years where you coach over 100 games. Whereas, a coach in England may have, if they're just a women's coach, for example, they may have 20 or less games in that year, experience or in that season. So I would say it's, the frequency of what is happening it's just all the time in the United States.
I think it's a very good point. Just getting that opportunity to hone your craft and getting the volume of practice in there is really important. I guess moving on, obviously you would then go on to become involved in international coaching, and as a return to somewhere that you already mentioned in Panama. So how did you first get that opportunity to take on an international coaching job?
Yeah, so I found out about the opportunity in 2019 that Panama was interested in bringing in American coaches to coach their national team program. I applied for it. I was selected in 2020 and announced as a coach in May of 2020, right in the middle of COVID.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point in terms of the timing. I mean, obviously, that was a difficult time for most people in the world. How did that impact your experience of setting up your program?
Yeah, it was really difficult. So I mentioned I got named the coach in May of 2020 is when the announcement came, and when the world was really shut down, and ultimately Panama shut down for longer than most of the rest of the world. So I didn't get a chance to visit Panama or go to Panama until May of 2021. So essentially an entire year. But Panama had only started to open up about 2 months prior to that. So they were like pretty much closed down till like March of 2021. So that was really challenging in the sense that like I was named the coach. We didn't have a team because we needed to go through, the tryout process. So there wasn't a whole lot that I could do, in that year other than watch an excessive amount of film. And one of the great things about flag football in Panama is that every game is filmed and every game is on YouTube. So, just evaluating players, watching as much film as I could, just, getting ready for the opportunity to go down there and host tryouts.
So see, is like obviously you mentioned there's like get to watch film. So when you were going into that program and you eventually got a chance to go there, what was your initial goals, having kind of assessed the situation in the squad and the program at that time?
Yeah, I think the goals were to not lower expectations, to keep the expectations high. Panama had a lot of success winning the 2016 World Championship that was in Miami, coming in second place in the 2018 World Championship in Panama. And we knew that the expectations were high. We wanted to, keep the expectations high. So, that for me was, an important.
Perfect.
And I think that's something that's really, I guess, important to call out. So for, it's probably well known within some folks in the flag community, but for others, you might not first think of Panama as being this hotbed of flag and American football generally. But as you've mentioned, they've already hosted a flag football World Championships. They'll actually be hosting the Flag Continentals, the Americas Championship in September. Maybe talk to us just a little bit more about the passion for the sport that's so specific to Panama.
Yeah, I've said this a lot. I mean, I think Panama is a really special place in the world for flag football. It has one of the most unique cultures in the world, in Panama City. There's so much going on there. The flag community is really close in Panama. They're very passionate. There's flag football outside of Panama City, but Panama City is the epicenter of, flag football in Panama. And it's just every night of the week there's practices, games, we talked a little bit before about, about the 2018 World Championship. And I think, being at the championship game between USA and Panama women, and seeing 2,000 fans in the stands, I think that was probably the first time that anybody had seen that at the World Championships. And I know for anybody that was there, it was just like a different feeling, that something we hadn't really experienced. And I think that just speaks to the passion that the Panamanians have for the sport. They're super dedicated and very talented, and it's really, I think that the culture of the sport is special in every country. The United States, we have, our culture is different. Mexico, there's a lot going on in Mexico, and they have a really cool culture. But at the end of the day, I think that's what makes Panama special is, just the flag community and the passion that they have for it.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And despite that short lead-in and the challenges of getting your team scouted and then selected and obviously getting them prepped for competition, you go on to the World Championships in Israel and achieve a 6-1 record at the tournament on the way to a 5th place finish. I think the only loss during that process was to Austria by a single point. So how did it feel to go and get your team on the field after all those delays?
Well, coming in 5th place felt terrible, to be honest with you. It was below our expectations, but yeah, I mean, it felt great to be on the field. I think everybody felt great. after, COVID to be back out. That World Championship was, I think it was supposed to be in Denmark, and then it got moved to Spain, and then it got moved to Israel. So it was supposed to be in August of 2021, then September, then it got pushed back to December of 2021. So it was certainly a long time coming for the international flag community, but it felt good being out there. But as you mentioned, we lost to Austria in the quarterfinals to a really good team, a veteran team. They played well, and not to take anything away from Austria, but like we felt like in a lot of ways we controlled that game. I think we had a touchdown taken away on a penalty, a touchdown taken away on a bad call where we scored on fourth down. They didn't call us in. We had a drop touchdown. Like we just really didn't play to our ability. Fifth place was disappointing for us for sure.
And I think definitely understandable, given that that standard the Panama program is set for itself. But one opportunity that did afford you, of course, is that fifth place finish would then take the team to the World Games in Birmingham in 2022. And actually, you had a fantastic opportunity to avenge that loss to Austria, as I think you actually faced them twice at the tournament, including in the bronze medal game. So talk to us a little bit about your experiences at the previous iteration of the World Games.
Yeah, so I think for us at the time in Panama, what was most important is, we had kind of gone into the 2021 World Championship without an intentional culture in what we were trying to build. The culture that we had was essentially the culture that naturally developed. And we thought it was, a good culture. But I think that you find out, during times of adversity, how strong your culture is. And one of the big changes going into the World Games is we were really intentional about the culture that we developed and that we built leading up to the World Games. And, there was certainly a sense of, it being a historic moment, with it being the first World Games. We were focused. We were ready to go. We had the United States in the first game. That was the first game of the tournament. So that was a big opportunity for us. And yeah, it was really a different experience. I think, we went into there in a much different place than we had gone into the World Championships.
That's excellent. And throughout the process of prepping for this interview, we'd spoken to a few of the players that played under you and coaches that worked with you. And culture is absolutely one of the themes that came out from that. So obviously you mentioned the challenge of trying to get that installed ahead of the Worlds. But what did you do? What were you able to do to really develop that over your time with the Panama team?
Yeah, I think it really is just about being intentional about what you're doing and being intentional about the culture that you're building. That was the real difference, is that we talked about it, and it was really important, I think, to everybody involved to develop the right culture for the team. Whereas going into Israel, the culture that we had was the one that naturally developed. We weren't intentional about it. So to me, that was the major difference in going into games.
Excellent. Thanks, Jack. And I guess moving on from that, so having spent a few years with the Panama program, the opportunity then opened up for you to move on and join the GB program initially as the defensive coordinator. So what really encouraged you to take on that new challenge in the other side of the Atlantic?
Yeah, my time in Panama had run out at the end of 2022, and I was contacted and told that there was a opening as an offensive coordinator for the GB women's team, and I wanted to continue coaching internationally. I really, really enjoyed it, and so I kind of jumped at that opportunity.
Excellent. And a move that really kicked off with the immediate success. So you obviously would go on to the European Championships in Ireland and Limerick, top-ranked offence, which is a great accolade for Team Enemy, but especially as the
the offensive coordinator, but you'd go on to beat Spain in the finals and take home the first gold medal for the GB program. So it was a flying success. And what can you attribute to really helping to take the team to that next level?
I think that, I really, because I kind of came in the middle of the process. I think it was March of 2023, so the team had already started, the process. And a couple of things that I noticed right away was the culture. There was seemed to be a really strong culture within the team. And then I also think that, the team was just really hungry. The team hadn't had the opportunity to compete internationally since 2019, where they had lost to Spain in the European Championship. Unfortunately, they weren't able to participate in 2021 World Championships in Israel, which meant that they weren't able to qualify for the World Games in Alabama. So the 2023 Euros was the first time that they were able to get on the field, in an official IFAF competition since the 2019 European Championship. And the team was just laser focused on, on that opportunity, but then also winning the European Championship.
Excellent. And moving now forward a bit towards the present day, so we're 2 years later on. Since that time, of course, we've had the World Championships where the team finished 7th. You're now in the head coach's seat. So tell us a little bit about how the team and even the program as a whole has evolved in the time that's passed.
Yeah, I think that, winning the European Championship in 2023, is obviously very satisfying to everybody, in the program, but we really felt like we had something to prove in Finland last year at the World Championship. And, there were a couple firsts, like the first time that the GB women ever played anybody outside of Europe, happened at the World Championship. But, I think that, without getting into, I guess, a bunch of details, we felt like we were better than our 7th place finish at the World Championship. And we were just a couple plays away in the Japan game. We lost by a touchdown, had a chance to tie it at the very end of the game, then lost to Canada by a point, 48-47. We walked away from Finland feeling very happy that we were qualified for the World Games and had this opportunity this year, certainly. But also feeling like we still had something to prove in that we were better than, the 7th place team in the world. So this year, has been a different challenge. I would say, one of the things that I did a pretty good job of in my first 2 years as the offensive coordinator for GB was focusing on being the offensive coordinator for GB and not focus on a whole lot else going on with the program. And the difference is, as the head coach, you're involved with everything going on with the program. So that's been the main difference for me personally, is just that increase in responsibility and needing to oversee the entire women's program. But I think for us, it was, this year has kind of been like a reset. I think culture was, I mentioned when I first came on board, I thought the culture was really good. I would say coming into this year, we needed to be really intentional about the culture that we were going to build this year, because we kind of got away from that, I would say, in 2024. So that's what we've done, and kind of looked at our offense, looked at our defense, and I think have made the it's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly speaking to a few of the veterans from last year's campaign at the World Cup, certainly I think that feeling of unfinished business is a theme that's really recurred amongst the players. But obviously you mentioned preparation and changing that culture. And I guess one of the big innovations, if you will, for this year's been that you've recently had a camp in Massachusetts in your own backyard. So do you want to talk us a little bit through the value of that experience for the team?
Yeah, so it was a great trip. It came about with us wanting to have an extended camp. And Chad, the CEO of BAFA, kind of challenging us to think outside the box and asking if a trip to the United States would be beneficial. So we were able to set that up in Massachusetts. The team stayed at Dean College in Franklin, which was my alma mater. So I was able to work with some connections there to have a really good setup. We had great facilities there, great a dining hall. We were able to practice, play in a couple local tournaments. With some good talent, and just really a great opportunity for the team to spend an extended period of time together, and work on things that we needed to work on and off the field.
Now, I guess we find ourselves really moving towards, I guess, probably one of the busiest periods that the programme's ever had, with the World Games and of course the Euros coming up after that. So I think let's actually just take a moment now to think about the World Games in particular. I guess you know this tournament perhaps better than anyone else in the setup, having already been to Birmingham and coming away with the bronze medal. How does the World Games compare with other tournaments? Because it is a slightly different format and a more condensed format as well.
Yeah, I think that. Well, what do you mean by a more condensed format?
I guess I'm thinking probably in terms of the size of the tournaments. You have the best teams in the world. It's real concentration. You've got big games all the way through.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely the biggest difference between the World Games and a continental championship or the World Championship, or past World Championships. I think next year's World Championship will be different.
Yes.
But just the quality of every team that's there. Every team has earned the right to be there, and every game is against one of the top teams in the world. So there's no, I would say the gap between all the teams is much closer. So there's that. But I think that the format is actually, it's really good, where it's spread out over 4 days. So, our schedule is we play one game on the first day, we play two games on the second day, we play two games on the third day, and then one game on the fourth day. So it's more stretched out. And, I think at the last Euros, we played three games every single day. Last year at the World Championships, there was certainly a day where we had three games. So I like the format. I think it's the future. When you look at the Olympics, we're not going to be playing multiple games in a day during the Olympics. We're probably going to be playing one game in a day. So I think from that aspect, it's really different than, what past IFAF competitions have looked like from a schedule standpoint. But I would say that the competition is, that's the biggest difference between the World Games and everything else.
Just going back to something, obviously Gav mentioned there your training camp in Boston you've done in preparation for the World Games. A few weeks ago, the squad was announced for the tournament. There's a couple of players in there that are kind of new to the actual squad. They've obviously been around the programme. People like Jess and Djokovic, for example. Like, what kind of freshness do they bring to your squad that you maybe wouldn't have had before without them?
Yeah, so I think we have five players that are going to China that haven't played for the GB Gold Squad in the past. I think just in general, this year's process, we had an open tryout in March. We made our selections at the end of our May camp. So we had open tryouts in March. We had a camp in April. And, each camp we invited less and less players to be considered for the Gold Squad. But I think just in general, I think we're faster, we're more athletic. We got a lot of great athletes. I think that we're really multi-dimensional, and that we have a lot of players that can play both sides of the ball, which is something that we were looking at coming into this year. We added some youth, with some of our players. So I think, Jessica Allen, I think she's, want to say 21 years old or turns 22 this year. Actually, I think her birthday was the day after Boston. Yeah, it was. So I think she turned 22. recently you have Jochebed and Hannah Elliott, who, are both 20 years old. Hannah might be 19. She might turn 20 at the end of this year as well. So, definitely brought some youth to the program. I think for me, one of the important things is that 4 of the players that were selected came through the Silvers program last year. So last year, we kind of restarted the Silvers program, and I think the goal was for one of those players to reach the Gold Squad this year, and we actually had 4 of them reach the Gold Squad this year, which was amazing. So yeah, I'm really excited about the roster that's heading to China.
Yeah, you mentioned there at bringing more athleticism to the squad. I tell you something right now, I wouldn't want to go for a jump ball with Jochebed. There's not a chance I would be. She's like some athlete. We've seen her at the women's flag finals day, and she's just an absolute athlete.
Well, you'd have to catch her first.
No, I wouldn't be able to do that either. Something else I want to kind of ask you about, Jack, as well, is your coaching setup. You've kind of went a bit international with that as well in terms of bringing in Marky. And someone that we heard a bit about when we spoke to Olivia Manfrey from Australia is Paul Manera. What kind of decision did you make in terms of making your coaching makeup for the tournament?
Yeah, so I think we knew, after last year, we needed to make some improvements on defense, improvements in every area. And so I was really challenged to, think about who we could bring in that could help us kind of reinvent the defense. And Marky was on our World Games staff in 2022. He also coached with me with the 507 Devils that had won the NFL Flag Championships a couple years ago. Just a great football mind, a former player for the Panama men's national team. He's been coaching for a really long time. And, I think we hit a home run, with Marky at defensive coordinator. I think he's done an amazing job. So he's from Panama. And then you have Fraser Thompson, who was with us last year. Him and Marky have done a great job working together on the defense. Fraser's from Scotland, as I'm sure you guys know. And then, our receivers coach, Andrew Mathers, he's been with the program for a really long time. And, he's done a great job working with our receivers this year. He's from England, and then Paul Manera has been a friend of mine for a really long time, for 18 years. He's one of the first people that I met when I got involved with international football, and Paul was the first coach of the Australian women's team for the last 2 years. Came in second place in the Asia Championships, and then led them last year at the World Championships in Finland. And he was available and expressed interest, and somebody that I really trust as well. So and he's from Australia. So I think a really cool stat is that we on our coaching staff we have coaches from 5 different countries that are brought together by their passion for the sport of flag football, and working together to try to make sure that the GB women achieve the highest level possible and qualify for the Olympics when that comes around.
One last question about the squad, Jack, and then we'll move on to talking about the tournament itself. You've selected Ellie Thorpe and Grace Conway as your captains for both sides of the ball. Without maybe inflating their egos a bit too much, what was your kind of decision between having the 2 of them as your captains?
Well, I think it was I think an easy decision. Ellie never stopped being a captain, I guess, if that makes sense. She was our captain last year, and so she never stopped being a captain. So I didn't necessarily select her as the captain. I guess reaffirmed her as the captain, but coming into this year, she's acted like the captain. That was never a title that was taken away in any way. We had the opportunity to add an offensive captain, and I think Grace was also an easy decision. I think that she's well respected by her teammates. She's been around the program for a really long time and leads by example. And so it really was just somebody that, deserved to have that honor bestowed on them. it was a pretty easy decision with Grace as well.
I can imagine Grace being a great leader of the squad. She's one of the most competitive people I've ever met, I think.
Yeah, I think Grace has been a pleasure to coach. She's really smart. Great player, great leader. She's not super vocal, like she speaks when she, needs to. But I think that, being named the captain has also given her the, the freedom to speak more, which is great.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. It's another great step in her journey, I think, from seeing her missing out on the Euros back in Dublin through injury to, I guess, the euphoria of getting back on the field in time for Worlds last year to now actually going to the World Games and hopefully the Euros as captain. I think it's great to see that progression. Yeah, great selection as captain.
Well, yeah, I think, you just mentioned the Euros a little bit, and, Grace had a devastating injury, a couple months before Euros, but she was a big part of our success, in winning the gold medal. She was in Limerick, she was doing anything she could, to help the team. And then, whether or not she would play in Finland was really up in the air all year last year. But just seeing the way that she, worked really hard in her recovery, was, I know everybody was rooting for her, but also, just everybody was really impressed with how she handled, that injury and was able to come back and be really productive for us, in Finland. So, yeah, I mean, it's something that she certainly in my 2.5 years or so with the program, she's earned that distinction of being the captain.
Absolutely. Well, we've spent a bit of time talking about our team, about GB and the Lionesses, but let's maybe take a moment now to think about the opposition and particularly looking at the teams that have been drawn against GB in the group phase. So it'd be interesting, Jack, just to get your thoughts on the opponents. So we'll run through them just in the order in which they come up in the schedule. So Italy, of course, we defeated 2012 back at the Worlds to clinch that place in the World Games. So what's your thoughts on the Italians? What can we expect?
Italy's a team that, like, personally for me, I've played in every major competition that I've coached. So with Panama, we played them in 2021 in Israel. We played them at the World Games in 2022. We played them at Euros in Ireland in 2023. And, as you mentioned, we played them last year at the World Championship. So, it's I would say an opponent we're familiar with, but at the same time believe they had a change in their coaching staff. So, that kind of throws a wrinkle into planning for them. But we expect a tough team, that's solid on offense and defense, and we're gonna have to, make some plays in order to win the game, I would say.
Perfect. And next up, then, we've got the Japanese, who unfortunately ended the GB team's campaign at the Worlds and at the quarterfinals. As you mentioned a little bit already, that was a 40-30 shootout that went right down to the final play. And I guess with the Japanese, one of the things that caught everyone's eye, and certainly ours, was that offense, as an offensive guru, you probably got to recognise the scheming that has gone into their program.
Yeah, I think Japan in general, not just the women, but the men's program, the youth programs. I mean, when we look back on flag football years from now, people are going to see the influence that Japan has had on this game. I think you're seeing it, everywhere. Countries are stealing their plays. We have some of their plays in our playbook, so, I think they've been really creative. They put a lot of work into, creating a system that works for them. They have a really talented quarterback who's, one of the best young quarterbacks in the game. I think she's only maybe 20 years old or 21, around there. She's playing at college in the United States. And yeah, I mean, they're a great team. Another team that is completely changed their coaching staff from last year. We don't expect their schemes to change, but certainly maybe some of their tendencies, with different coaches calling the plays. But yeah, I mean, we feel that, we should have won that game, that we could have won that game. maybe the better team. And, not taking anything away from Japan. Japan earned it. They won the game. But yeah, we're looking forward to that rematch in China.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to be a really exciting one to watch. And then, of course, the group phase finishes off with an opponent that GB has never faced before. As you mentioned, is only very recently they played opposition outside of Europe. But it is a team that certainly they're not hard to find. They're the reigning World Games champions in Mexico. What are your thoughts on that battle?
Yeah, in Mexico, right now they're one of the top 2 flag football playing countries in the world, them in the United States. And I think one of our goals in China this year is to disrupt the, order of women's flag football right now in the world. And I think that, for the last 5 years, it's been the U.S. and Mexico. Mexico won the last World Games in 2022. The U.S., I think, has got them at the Americas and then again at the World Championship last year. And, we feel like, our best 12 in Great Britain can compete with anybody in the world. And I think we proved that in Finland last year in really competitive games against Japan, who, won the bronze medal, and Canada, which has historically been, one of the best women's flag programs in the world. But, we can really accomplish that by beating Mexico. So it's going to be a challenge. Mexico presents a lot of challenges on offense and defense. And yeah, but we're looking forward to the opportunity to play them in the group stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the beauties of this World Games tournament is that not only is it the best teams in the world, but actually, if you look back at some of the contests, obviously we've mentioned some of the games that Great Britain's had at the Worlds last year, but even looking at some of the other teams, I think about Japan playing Mexico in the semi-finals last year, Spain even, I know they've not gone to the Worlds, but they had a lead over the Americans at the Worlds as well. Most of these countries are capable on their day of beating the other. Of course, it's going to require you to play full 40 minutes plus, but I think it just shows that anything can happen.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like when you look at the quarterfinals last year in Finland at the World Championships in the women's division, you had the USA beat Spain 18-14. That game could have gone either way. You had Japan beat us 40-34. We feel like that game could have gone another way. Mexico beat Canada in a game that Canada led by multiple touchdowns in the first half. Like if you watch that game, Canada could have, should have had a different result against Mexico. And then when you look at the other quarterfinal was Italy versus Austria, I think that was like a 1 or a 2 point game. So you literally could have had, I think the US, Mexico, Japan, and Austria were the 4 winners. It very easily could have been Spain, Canada, GB, and Italy, in the Final Four last year. And that's what's really exciting right now in the sport of women's flag football, that I think any team that's in China is capable of beating any other team in China. And there's some teams that aren't going to be at the World Games that are capable of beating teams that, that are there. Like we had a 1 point victory over Panama, who finished 10th place in Finland. You got Germany, who finished in 9th place. They beat Japan in group play, I believe, in Finland. So it's there's a lot of parity right now, I think, within women's flag football, except for when you look at the gold and silver medals, have kind of been dominated by the U.S. and Mexico over the last 5 years. Our goal is to hopefully disrupt that order this year in China.
And I guess one other thing I really want to ask about is that with the Olympics, of course, it does add another interesting factor in terms of raising the stakes. So, of course, there's ranking points in play as part of this tournament. So is it possible that actually getting through the quarterfinals, and that quarterfinal matchup is perhaps one of the most important of all at this tournament?
I think that the quarterfinal matchup is really important at any tournament. because that means if you win the quarterfinal, you're playing for medals. At some point, you're in the semifinals. You're, either winning and going and playing for a gold medal, or you still have the opportunity to play for bronze if you slip up in the semifinals. But so I would say at any competition, the quarterfinals are really important. I don't. I'm not so much worried about the ranking points right now. I think that ranking points are important. I don't think they're going to determine Olympic qualifying. I think what they're going to do is determine seeding at Olympic qualifying events. So, for example, the next summer's World Championship will be seeded based on what the ranking points are, but qualifying for the World Championship is not based on ranking points, and I don't believe qualifying for the Olympics will be based on rankings either. So, I'm personally not that worried about ranking points. Although I prefer telling people that we're the 5th ranked team in the world rather than we finished 7th at the World Championships. I would say right now, the ranking points feel more accurate to me, but at the end of the day, you gotta win games on the field.
You've got to just go with whatever the highest is. If it's ranking points or world qualification, you always go with the highest one.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's it. I guess obviously we've spent a lot of time talking about the World Games. That's imminent, but there is another tournament coming up not long after. The team isn't going to have long to dwell on the World's experience, because 6 weeks later they'll go on to defend the European title in Paris. So what are the challenges and the opportunities that come with having 2 major tournaments such as this back to back?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the opportunities. I think that it's amazing that we have 2 major competitions in one year. That's never really happened before in the history of international football. I think that we're super lucky that the authorities in China decided to have women's flag. My understanding is that they had a choice. They could only have one gender, either men's or women's, and they chose women's. So I feel super fortunate that they did that and thankful that they did that. I think one of the challenges is, at the end of the day, what do the World Games count for? And I think they really count for ranking points ultimately. But I think it's a historic event, and it's the first time ever that that women are being given that platform and that spotlight, and that and the men aren't. So for us, the World Games is super important. I think one of the challenges is, you're going to have 8 countries in the world that are playing in a major competition, while the rest of the countries are watching them play. So we're not, really planning on hiding too much at World Games. I don't think we're going to have the luxury to, hide a whole lot. So it's, as coaches, what do we change from going from the World Games to the Euros? And that's, kind of the disadvantage that those countries playing in China have versus the ones that aren't playing. But, we don't have a whole lot of time to change things. I think we have one camp, we have some online sessions, some virtual sessions, but, we only have one camp in between. So I think that's a challenge in having them so close together. But I think it's great. I think we all do this because we love doing this, and what's better than 2 major competitions in back-to-back months?
Yeah. Just a quick question on that back-to-back then, Jack. So you've got the lead up to the World Games. You've got from the draws made until the tournament starts to kind of do your scouting and your prep for your oppositions. With the Euros being so close to it, when do you start feeding the kind of scouting to the players about the teams at the Euros? Are you going to basically just have to do it in that 6-week period, or have you started doing that already?
We've only focused on the World Games. There's been some behind the scenes work done on Euros, but from a player perspective, we've just focused on the teams that we're looking to play in China, and we'll worry about the Euros as soon as probably on the flight home from.
It's a long flight. Just in terms of from a head coach's point of view, like that must be a big challenge for you in terms of like you have 6 weeks now to prepare for a major tournament compared to the length of time you've had to prepare for the World Games.
Yeah, I think it is a challenge, but at the same time, I think playing 6 games in China is going to better prepare us for the for the Euros than, let's say, a normal August camp would, or like a normal schedule would. So I think playing in China is a great opportunity to develop as a team, and to get better, more so than just a regular camp, would.
Perfect.
I think that's very true. We've seen certainly some of the other European nations. I think Germany and Israel went out to play in LA against some of the top teams in the world. So they've had their shot at preparing for the Euros, but actually this is now your opportunity to see some different looks and get that competition. The World Games a big competition in its own right, but absolutely, I don't think you could ask for better preparation for a European title defence than playing the likes of America, Mexico, Japan.
Yeah, no, certainly. The only disadvantage, I mentioned it earlier, is that all the European countries will have a lot of film on Austria, Italy, and GB.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, we're happy to be in the World Games and wouldn't trade it for not being there, for sure.
Hopefully that footage scares them off, Jack. Hopefully the footage scares them off when they see how good you are.
Yeah, we'll see.
Absolutely. Well, I guess one final point. We perhaps won't spend too long on it because it is still a couple of years away. But as you mentioned, of course, GB is 5th in the world, and I think we certainly would view them as the team as perfect fit for European Olympic contenders. With the Olympics on the horizon, we're obviously seeing this growth in the program. What do you think still needs to be done to make GB a true Olympic level program?
I think we've made a lot of improvements this year. I think, BAFA has made it a priority to not just the women's team, but the men's team to bring in, support staff to help us, let's say fill those gaps in what a true Olympic program, would have. I think that we continue to improve our, player evaluations and our player recruitment, our talent identification. I don't know that there's one specific area other than, funding. I think, while we're super grateful for, the funding from UK Sport, I think it pales in comparison to the level of funding that some other countries are receiving from their, whether it's national Olympic committees or, their governments. But I think that, everybody within BAFA is working in the same direction. Chad and the team at BAFA have done a tremendous job in supporting our team, going out to China, supporting us and the men going to Paris for the European Championships. It's a hard question. I'm not sure that there's like one thing that we're missing. I think we just need to continue elevating everything that we.
Thanks, Jack. And one final thing, maybe mention, because we did speak to, I'd say, a few of your players and coaches. I think we mentioned obviously, football knowledge has really come out, your experience, but one other thing that's mentioned is just staying calm under pressure and composed, that we've heard from multiple players. What is it that helps you to relax?
Maybe just confidence in what I'm doing and confidence in the players. I think one of the great things about football, and I talk about this all the time, is like, after first down you have second down, and after second down you have third down, and hopefully after third down you have first down, but sometimes you have fourth down. So, but it's like there's nothing you can do about the last play, so you're just constantly moving forward and trying to figure out, solutions for the next play, regardless of what the situation is, if it's first down or if it's fourth down, you're just trying to figure out how you can be successful on that next play. And I think that over the years, I've just kind of stayed calm. in pressure situations. I think it's being in those situations, the more experience you have with them, the easier it is. For example, we were in Canton, Ohio a couple weeks ago, and we played a couple games on ESPN, and some of the kids were really nervous. Some of the boys and the girls were really nervous because it was their first time playing on ESPN. And I've played on ESPN before and won championships, and been in high pressured situations like the European finals and other situations. And I wouldn't underestimate like the pressure of coaching an 8U team when all the parents' expectations are that you win the game. Like that's hard to me. That's harder than the European championships, to be honest with you. So yeah, I think it's just having that experience, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic answer. And I mean, thanks to the coaches and the players that actually fed in, because we'd asked them for a couple of lines and they came back to us with speeches. So we could be here for quite a while, actually, if I read through each of them. We'll actually make a point of putting them up in socials. But suffice to say that, obviously, Jack, well respected, not just from the current team, but actually some of your former players with Panama as well. And we can really see how it's coming through in the culture in the GB camp, and we really look forward to setting the alarm. We'll be back in Scotland, getting up early to watch the games in China, and we wish you and the squad nothing but the very best.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you guys today. And yeah, thanks for everything that you guys do to help promote and cover the team. It doesn't go unnoticed for sure. And yeah, we're really excited, and hopefully we give you guys some good stuff to talk about.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Well, we'd love to keep talking because there's so much that we could cover off, but you actually need to go to a call with the team to prepare for camp. So we'll say thanks very much for joining this evening, Jack, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thanks.